Hello and welcome to American Catholic History, brought to you by the support of listeners like you. If you like American Catholic History, please become a supporter at americancatholichistory.org. Also, if you don't already, be sure to follow the podcast and give us a 5-star rating and a great review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crowe.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Today we're talking about Commodore John Barry, the father of the U.S. Navy. Now, most people would probably be more familiar with that title being given to John Paul Jones. But Barry, the immigrant from Ireland who was only too happy to fight the British here in America, has at least as strong a claim.
He does indeed. John Paul Jones had a lot of success in battle on the high seas. He got more of the big headlines.
And he was much more of a self-promoter.
Yes, Jones had no problem telling people about himself, even going so far as to have copies of a bust of himself made in Paris to send out to various people.
Yes, but Barry was more important for the establishment and structure of the U.S. Navy. He didn't have as many victories at sea, but he had some important ones, including the first and final naval engagements of the Revolutionary War. Then after the war, when the new nation was formally establishing the various things an independent nation needs, Barry was key. He directed the construction and outfitting of the first naval vessels, successfully pushed to have the Department of the Navy established as its own thing, and he was made the first commissioned officer and first flag officer of the new permanent U.S. Navy. Now, I know you're itching to share his humble Irish beginnings, so let's start telling his story.
I am. John Barry was born in 1745 in County Wexford, which is on the southeastern corner of the island of Ireland. His parents, James and Ellen Barry, were Catholic tenant farmers on land owned by a wealthy Protestant Englishman. John was the oldest of their 5 children. At the time, the English still ruled Ireland, and anti-Catholic penal laws were still in full force. The Mass was outlawed. So was the Irish language, Gaelic. Catholics couldn't own land, hold public office, nor receive a formal education, and their ability to participate in the economy was severely hampered in many ways. The Barrys lived in squalor. Eventually, they were evicted from the land and were forced to move to Rosslare, a coastal town. At 10 years old, John went to work as a cabin boy on his uncle's fishing vessel. His wages became important income for the family.
John took to sailing like a fish to water. By 15, he had risen from cabin boy to mate, and at 15, he left Ireland to seek a better life in America. He never returned to Ireland. But he took with him his Catholic faith, his understandable dislike of the English, and his skill as a sailor.
Yes, he arrived in Philadelphia in 1760. Philadelphia was already one of the most important port cities in the New World, and thus a prime choice for a young sailor looking for fortune. But there was another reason Philly was a good place for him.
The anti-Catholicism of the English had come to the New World, too. The Catholic faith was banned up and down the colonies. Even in Maryland, the colony founded by Catholics for Catholics, there were laws against Catholics holding office, celebrating Mass in public, and more. The only colony that was different was Pennsylvania. Founded by the Quaker William Penn, Pennsylvania's Charter of Privileges granted religious liberty even to Catholics.
Now, to be sure, Protestants in the Pennsylvania colonial government tried to pass laws against Catholics, but each time the laws were struck down by the royal courts due to that charter. This meant that at the time, the Chapel of St. Joseph in Philadelphia was the only place in the entire English-speaking world where the Holy Mass could be celebrated in public.
So, John Barry was in a city where he could practice his faith and pursue his profession. And he did. He rose from seaman to mate until at 21 years of age, 9 years before the Revolutionary War began, John Barry was given his first command. As captain of the schooner Barbados, Barry made 9 trips to the West Indies without a single mishap, honing his skill and making a name for himself among the Philadelphia upper class and shipping firms.
The increased income meant he could send even more money back home, and he could get married. He married an Irish girl, Mary Cleary, and settled into life in burgeoning pre-revolution Philadelphia. He joined the prestigious charitable organization, the Sea Captains Club, which was an organization established to help the widows and orphans of sailors lost at sea.
Membership in the Sea Captains Club had another benefit for Barry. While he and many other captains came from rough beginnings, some of the men in the club were of more noble or privileged birth. Barry was sure to observe these men at formal engagements to see how they bore themselves, which fork to use with which course, and overall how to be a gentleman in refined settings. Those experiences paid off handsomely later in life as he moved in circles with the founding fathers of the country.
But it wasn't only in the drawing room and dining room that he cared about his actions toward others. He was known to be a strict but fair captain who cared for his men. Even prisoners taken by his ship remarked on his magnanimity and fairness. Every day on board ship would begin with him reading to the crew from the Bible.
He also was a very large man for his day, growing to a powerful 6 feet 4 inches tall at a time when most men were well under 6 feet. His physical size and courage enabled him to personally put down 3 mutinies over the years.
So, moving on through his career, after the Barbados came a few shorter-term commands of increasing prestige until in 1774, the largest merchant shipping firm in Philadelphia, Willing, Morris, and Cadwallader, tapped Barry to captain and own the 200-ton Black Prince. It was as captain of the Black Prince that Barry recorded the fastest day of sailing in the 18th century, covering 237 miles in a 24-hour period on a return voyage from England.
But the year 1774 had dark clouds for John Barry, too. That year, Mary died while John was at sea, leaving John a childless widower at just 29 years old. Also, the situation with England was reaching a boiling point as the Continental Congress convened for the first time in his hometown of Philadelphia.
John Barry had no love lost for the English. He maintained strong ties to his family back in County Wexford, exchanging letters and sending money regularly. He remembered being evicted as a youth and never forgot the story of 3,000 Wexfordians being slaughtered by the invading forces of Oliver Cromwell. During his lifetime, one of the most significant revolts against the English rule took place, the ill-fated 1798 Rising, and one of the major battles of that revolt took place in Wexford. So when the opportunity to fight the English came up, the capable Irish sailor was only too happy to join the cause.
Indeed, though that last one that you mentioned happened after the Revolutionary War.
I said it was during his lifetime.
I know that. Just mentioning. Had continuing cause even after the Revolutionary War. Mm-hmm. Yes. So the Revolutionary War broke out in 1775, April 19th to be exact, with the shot heard round the world fired in Lexington, which is about 30 minutes from where I grew up, actually.
Yes, we were in Concord and Lexington in April for the 250th anniversary of that event. It was an incredible experience, just so much history. So Barry sold the Black Prince to the Continental Congress, which turned it into the warship Alfred. Incidentally, this was the ship which John Paul Jones would command at the beginning of the war. Barry was given command of the first ship of war, Lexington, and was tasked with outfitting for war both Lexington and Alfred, and the many other merchant ships purchased to form the Continental Navy.
It was aboard the Lexington in April of 1776 that Barry won the first naval victory of the Revolution, when they captured the British sloop Edward off the Capes of Virginia. Shortly thereafter, he was brought back to Philadelphia to oversee the construction of a new ship for him to command, the Effingham. But he couldn't let the fighting go on without him, just because he didn't have a ship to command.
Of course not. He was a man's man, an Irish fighter, and there are Englishmen out there trying to oppress him once again. He joined General George Washington's forces and carried out a number of daring raids and assaults along the Delaware River and other inland waterways. He destroyed a number of British ships and supply depots.
He even offered his services to the infantry, serving with the Marines under the command of his old shipping boss, John Cadwallader. Cadwallader had been made a Marine general, and he appointed Barry to be an aide-de-camp. While a Marine, Barry took part in the Battle of Trenton in December 1776, and then led a defensive effort in the Battle of Princeton the following January. Washington noticed his bravery and ability and later tapped Barry to transfer wounded soldiers through British lines, as well as to take a dispatch to General Cornwallis under a flag of truce.
Oh man, I can only imagine the emotions and feelings of that moment. The Wexford peasant boy, born in poverty with families still living under English oppression, looking eye to eye with Lord Cornwallis during a great war to cast off the English yoke and have an opportunity for liberty. Must have been quite a moment for both of them.
And this sentiment is made all the more poignant when you consider that it was during this time that Barry was actually offered a bribe to switch loyalties.
Yes, and it's unclear who the bribe came from, but he was offered 15,000 gold guineas, or 20,000 British pounds sterling, plus a commission in the Royal Navy if he would turn over his new ship, the Effingham, to the British.
Now, for context, that's 20,000 pounds in 1777 money, and that would equal about 4.2 million pounds or $5.6 million in today's money. So, no small sum.
No, not at all. But with everything he'd been through, British money meant nothing compared to the prospect of freedom. He pointedly refused, saying he spurned the idea of being a traitor.
And after so many years of itching for a chance to cast off the British yoke, there wasn't much of a chance that he would turn traitor.
No. After the Effingham, Barry had two other commands. In 1778, he took command of the Raleigh, but not too long after leaving port, the Raleigh was spotted by a far superior British force. For 48 hours, he eluded capture until making it to Maine's Penobscot Bay. There, he scuttled the ship and tried to evacuate his crew and set fire to the ship to prevent it being captured. He did not succeed in evacuating the entire crew, nor in blowing up the Raleigh, however, because one treacherous sailor aboard ship prevented the escape of about one-third of the crew. But he did lead 88 sailors to safety in rowboats all the way to Boston Harbor.
Then his final command of the war was aboard the 36-gun frigate Alliance. On it, he had two of his most noteworthy battles. First, in May 1781, the Alliance engaged two much smaller British vessels, the sloops Trespassy and Atlanta. The Alliance had the advantage in firepower, but being so much larger, it required more wind to move. So, when the winds died down, the Alliance was becalmed. But the smaller vessels were able to maneuver into position to fire on the Alliance while staying out of the Alliance's field of fire.
The fight was going poorly for the Alliance for hours, and Barry was leading what defense they could muster until the burst of canisters severely wounded him and he had to be taken below decks due to loss of blood. As he was being attended to, the ship's colors were shot down. His second-in-command came to him asking if they should surrender. Barry angrily responded, "No, sir, the thunder! If this ship cannot be fought without me, I will be brought on deck. To your duty, sir!" Wait for it, folks. She's composing herself.
Such a dramatic moment. Shortly after the colors were Shortly after the colors were reflown, a gust of wind allowed the Alliance to come about quickly. Suddenly, all 14 12-pound cannons on the starboard side of the Alliance were firing at the attackers. Just 2 volleys later, the British vessels struck their own colors and surrendered.
When the British commander came on board and presented his sword, Barry gave it back to him, saying, "I return it to you, sir. You have merited it, and your king ought to give you a better ship."
Not sure about your accent. But he was very magnanimous in victory, for sure. As we've said, a very fair gentleman.
Yes, maybe so. Anyhow, in March of 1783, Barry commanded the Alliance in the final naval engagement of the Revolution. The Alliance was escorting another ship that was carrying 72,000 Spanish silver dollars from Havana to the colonies to support the Americans in the Revolution. Off Cape Canaveral, Florida, the British frigate Sybil approached, and the Alliance engaged her to protect the precious cargo. After 45 minutes, the gun crews of the Alliance had wrecked the Sybil badly enough that she fled, and thus ended the naval components of the American Revolution.
But not Barry's life at sea, nor his involvement with the American Navy. Barry returned to merchant sailing and made a number of successful trips to East Asia. He had remarried in 1777 to Sarah Austin. They had no children of their own, but in 1787, they took responsibility for the two young sons of Barry's sister and brother-in-law, who had both died in Wexford. They welcomed those boys into their home and raised them as their own. One of those boys, Patrick, accompanied Barry on a voyage to China, sailing south around Cape Horn.
Barry had a solicitous approach to many people, especially fellow ex-sailors and those who came from Ireland looking for a new start. He helped many to get on their feet, he appealed to the government on their behalf, and he welcomed many into his own home to stay for a time. He was a very generous, big-hearted man. In fact, his efforts to aid those in need, particularly Irish, contributed to the establishment a few decades later of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, an organization established to promote Irish causes and to counteract the malicious anti-Catholic and anti-Irish activities of groups like the Know-Nothings.
In 1794, the new United States set out to establish a standing permanent naval force. Barbary pirates were harassing American vessels, especially off the coast of Africa. President George Washington knew they needed naval might to protect America's interests, and he tapped Barry to help set up this new navy and nominated him to be the first commissioned officer. His commission was confirmed by the Senate on February 22nd, 1797, George Washington's birthday, by the way. He was issued commission number 1, but it was backdated to June 4th, 1794, the date of his original appointment. His rank was captain, but he was given the title of Commodore, making him the first flag officer of the United States Navy. In 1798, at his recommendation, the Department of the Navy was established as a separate department from the Department of War.
Among his duties during the mid to late 1790s, he oversaw the construction of the first fleet of ships for the new Navy, though their construction took much longer than he hoped for. His new command, the frigate United States, didn't float until May of 1797, but Commodore Barry was at its helm when it did.
By this time, the Barbary pirates weren't the only threat to the United States. To be sure, they remained a threat, and in 1805, the Navy dropped off a bunch of Marines on the shores of Tripoli to capture an important port city that had been a source of trouble. But in 1798, the United States was engaged in what was known as the Quasi-War with their Revolutionary-era ally, France.
France had, of course, had their own revolution, and unlike the American Revolution, which had resulted in relative stability, the French Revolution had led to chaos and upheaval. Well, politics being what they are, alliances shifted and the U.S. was suddenly better friends with the British than with the French. Also, the U.S. had decided not to repay French loans from the war, so the French were a little bit salty.
Understandable. All of this led to French hostilities on the high seas, and the U.S. making countermoves to stop them. The U.S. Navy was a major part of that effort, and Barry's work made it possible, both in organizing the Navy and as a ship's captain.
Yes, Barry captained the SS United States in that conflict. The Quasi-War only lasted for a couple of years and ended in 1800 with a new Franco-American alliance. When he was aboard ship during the Quasi-War, he wore a notable sword at his side, a golden-hilted sword in its gold-tipped scabbard. This sword was the gift of none other than John Paul Jones. Jones had received the sword as a gift from King Louis XVI of France upon the occasion of being made a Chevalier of the Kingdom of France. Upon his death in 1793, Jones bequeathed the sword to Barry.
Now, we haven't talked about this much, but Barry and Jones had a mutual respect. As we said before, they were very different men, but they did meet on a number of occasions and recognized each other's ability and worth. It was truly a remarkable generation that made American independence possible and then built this country.
Barry was certainly an underappreciated member of that class. After the Quasi-War, Barry retired from active duty, though he remained the senior officer of the U.S. Navy until his death.
And that death came just a few years later. He suffered from severe asthma and gout in his later years, no doubt a result of the hard life of a sailor during a time of war.
He died of asthma, actually, on September 13th, 1803, at his home in Strawberry Hill, Philadelphia. He was survived by his wife, Sarah, and their nephew, Patrick. After his Requiem Mass, he was buried in the graveyard of St. Mary's Church in Philadelphia. His tomb is a prominent, but not ostentatious, granite monument.
There are at least 3 other monuments to him. 2 are impressive bronze statues atop granite pedestals. One of them is in Washington, D.C., in a park along K Street, just a few blocks from the White House. The other is right in front of Independence Hall in Philly, and that's fittingly prominent.
Absolutely. The other monument, so to speak, is far more subtle, but more poignant. This one is at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Now, the Naval Academy Chapel is a monumental church. The barrel vault ceiling, the copper dome, the stained glass, the great organ, it is all quite impressive. One of the most impressive parts of the chapel is the burial chamber in the crypt level. This forest of marble pillars and balustrades features the great ornate marble sarcophagus of John Paul Jones. The whole production is modeled on the sarcophagus and burial chamber of Napoleon Bonaparte. So it's exactly what Jones would have designed for himself if given the chance.
In that chamber, you can find the sword that Jones left to Barry. But that's not the most important memorial to Barry in the chapel. High above that room of marble and gold is John Barry's personal Bible, possibly one that he read from while aboard ship. It is preserved by the chapel and, from time to time, rests on the altar in the sanctuary of the chapel. Just as John Paul Jones would have designed his crypt, Barry likely would have preferred this simple tribute. A life lived in service to God, to his extended family, to anyone else he could help, and to his adopted country, which he helped to establish and defend. Truly, a life well lived. This has been American Catholic History. If you enjoy American Catholic History, please become a supporter. We've got great perks for supporters. Get information on how to become a supporter and the perks at americancatholichistory.org/support.
Also on our website, sign up for our newsletter, learn more about Commodore John Barry, see about our pilgrimages, and find other great stories from American Catholic history.
We also love the great reviews our listeners leave. Those and the 5-star ratings help others find us. You can also email us feedback, questions, tips for episode topics, or other comments at feedback@americancatholichistory.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/American Catholic History, on Instagram at ACH_podcast, and follow us on X at ACH1513. I'm Noelle Huster-Crow.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Thanks for listening to American Catholic History, brought to you by the support of listeners like you. Suddenly, all 14 12-pound cannons on the starboard side of the Alliance were flying at the attackers.
Throw the cannons! Throw the cannons!